G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. G'day. Welcome back to the AgriCoach Wealth and Wisdom podcast, the show for families who want more than just financial success. They want to grow and protect their wealth, strengthen relationships, and maintain their success across the generations. I'm Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. And in this episode today, we're going to talk about something that runs deep in every family, the stories we've inherited, the way we lead, communicate, make decisions, and even how we deal with money. It's all influenced by what came before us. You see, most of us think we're running our lives and our farms based on the decisions we make today. But the truth is, many of us are still being shaped by stories written years ago by our parents, our grandparents, or even the generation before them. The way we communicate, handle conflict, lead, and also love. It didn't start with us. And if we don't examine those old stories, we risk repeating them. That's why this conversation matters, because if you want to be a high-performing family, one that grows stronger and stronger with each generation, you've got to understand the patterns that got you here and consciously choose a better story for what comes next. And there's no one better to unpack that than today's guest, Lael Stone. Lael's an educator, counsellor, and international speaker who spent more than 20 years helping parents, leaders, and individuals build emotional intelligence and resilience. She's the co-author of the best-selling book, Raising Resilient and Compassionate Children, and the author of her brand new release, Own Your Story, Understanding the Past to Create Your Future. Lael's work sits right at the intersection of psychology, parenting, and leadership. And what makes it powerful is that it's practical. It's about doing the inner work that changes everything around you. Like many families I know, in my own family, emotions were often repressed. On the surface, everything looked calm, but underneath there was a lot that was never spoken about, and that silence shaped how we related to each other. It's the same story I see in so many farming families I work with. Families who are strong, capable, and successful, and good character, but who know they could be even stronger if they face the stories running beneath the surface. So today we're diving into what it really means to own your story, how to recognize those inherited patterns, reframe them, and then create a healthier, stronger future for you and your family, as well as your business. So without further delay, Lael Stone, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute privilege to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's one of those really weird things, Lael, at the moment is, I consistently get wives coming in and saying, I've tried to get my husband to listen to your podcast all the time. And my wife doesn't listen to podcasts. And then, as I think I told you last time we talked, about 6 months ago, my wife came home and she's gone, oh my God, you've got to listen to this lady, Lael Stone. And of course, I was sitting at home. I think I was sitting on the lounge watching the Idiot Box. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then she came back the next day, have you listened to that thing I sent through to you? And I'm like, no. And then finally I got an insight into how my listeners are with the rest of the family. So that was fantastic. And so I listened to your stuff and Sarah and I chatted about it and I went, this is someone I've got to have on the podcast. So it's fantastic to have you here today. And now before we get into the real nitty-gritty of things, you've worn a lot of hats in your career from what I've seen, educator, counsellor, speaker, author, and you've touched thousands of families. Can you share a little bit about your journey and how you got into this writing and speaking space?
Yeah, well, look, if I go back to kind of my first business I started my first business when I was 20 because I finished school. I was like, you're so sweetly naive. You think the world is just there for you to take, which it is, And so I went and traveled for a few years, came back and was like, right, I went and worked for someone doing kind of entertainment, like children's entertainment, and they were paying me appallingly. And I was like, I could do this 10 times better and make 10 times the amount of money. So I literally started a business by myself when I was 20, bought a mobile phone, got a business card and went, right, we're open. And then learned so much. I just, I went from just being me to, I think I had a team of 10 people that used to work for me. And we used to entertain kids at birthday parties, and we put on big shows and school holidays. It was really amazing. And I'm so proud of that younger version of me that just created it from nothing. And I look back at that version of me now and think she was so naive, but so confident of just, we'll give this a go. Let's see how that is. And I love that about the youth. We're full of ideas and you don't know how it's meant to be done. So you just find your own way, which is beautiful. So I did that for many, many years, for about 7 or 8 years. And then in between that, I had my first child when I was 25, and that was a bit of a shock to the system. I was kind of like, whoa, here's a whole other intense job experience. And then I had my second child a few years later, and I had a really powerful birth experience with my second baby, had a traumatic birth with my first and a really beautiful one with my second. And that just awoke something in me where I went, wow, this is what I want to do for a living. So I actually closed that entertainment business and then studied to become a childbirth educator and a doula and work kind of in postnatal kind of trauma counselling. So then I moved into working in birth for a long time, which was I look back now, such a beautiful foundation for the work I do around understanding people, understanding trauma, understanding the imprints, behaviors, all that kind of stuff. Having a child and becoming a parent is one of the rawest, most vulnerable moments of your life. And there is a lot that is set up in that. So I've worked in that field for a long time, created one of the first online birth education programs that we had in Australia. This was probably about 10, 12 years ago. Ran workshops for health practitioners as well, who worked with pregnant women, really just saw lots of opportunities to use education in a big way. I had my third child amongst that as well. And then, started doing a lot more work in trauma and then moved more on to working in parenting. And so then I was working one-on-one with families just around issues that were turning up with their kids. And then that kind of moved into, bigger workshops, all that kind of stuff. And then I somehow found myself teaching sex education to teenagers for about 5 years in secondary school. So I've literally just...
That sounds like a challenging job.
Look, for some people, that sounds like their idea of the worst job in the world. I have to tell you, it was a very fun job. Nothing will ever shock me ever again. I have such a sweet spot for teenagers because I just think, they're so desperate for the right information, but everyone's too awkward to talk about it. So I did that for many years. And then I ended up building my own school. So I spent 3 years building a school called Woodline Primary, which is down here just out of Geelong in Victoria with another woman. We created it together. And that was a school based all on emotional intelligence, trauma-informed practices, and really, I think, wanting to create a space where children could learn in the way that makes sense for them. So we're a play-based learning school. We're big on all the different ways that children can learn using their hands. We are massively about learning in nature, taking care of the earth, all those kind of things. So we did that. Then I wrote my first book, which was a parenting book. And then...
That was Raising Resilient Children, wasn't it?
Yes, Raising Resilient, Compassionate Children. And then, I think I just started doing more keynote speaking. There was a bit more of a demand, especially when I opened my school, to talk to educators and talk to parents, and just started traveling around Australia talking. I worked with the Resilience Project for quite a while too, which was a beautiful collaboration of just bringing a parenting lens to the work that they do. And then I wrote my second book, Own Your Story, which came out a few months ago. And these days, I spend a lot of time coaching kind of groups and people online. I do a lot of keynote speaking all over the country and the world internationally. And really, I guess my work now is focusing on us as adults and understanding ourselves. I think in all the work I've done, particularly with that lens around parenting and raising children, I began to see so clearly that we can have all the tools and we can use all these things, but if we don't do our own inner work and we don't understand our imprints and our stories, then the tools that we use will only go so far. So I think in the trajectory of my journey, I started at birth. So I started with babies, kind of worked through kids into teenagers, and now I'm landing with the adults, and I'm like, okay, it's up to us to change some of our stuff, to do some of the bigger healing work around the stories and the traumas and the things that we carry, because we often won't be able to step forward in the way we want unless we look at them. So that's kind of how I got to be here, really.
An exciting journey by the sound of things. It's a bit like me. You sort of take this wandering journey and give things a crack, see where it ends up, and it's actually really exciting thinking about where you might be in another 5 years, Lael.
It is, isn't it? Because, I really am a big fan of that nothing is wasted. Like everything is relevant. And I think back to those years when I first started my business, which was entertaining children. The skills I learned then serve me today every time I get on a stage to speak. How do you have presence? How do you, speak to a crowd? How do you engage people? Like all the things that I learned back then that I didn't realize I was learning, I use every day now. I mean, I just think nothing is wasted. It's the same as understanding trauma or sitting with people in their most rawest moments. It really gives you an insight into who we are as humans and how much compassion we need for each other.
Well, today, I suppose, like raising resilient children, I've got a 9-year-old, so raising resilient children is really important for me. But here's the thing, Lael, most of the families that I work with, your new book is probably going to really, really resonate because of the issues that we see in families. So I deal with a lot of high-performing families or people that want to become high-performing families. In the rural industry, most farmers are family-owned businesses as such. And a big problem in the rural space is this whole intergenerational transfer or succession, so how we get families to work together. And so I spend a lot of my time working with how to create a family, how to communicate, how to grow and transition wealth. And a lot of that I find over time is there's these stories or these histories that's just tied into individuals and families, which just causes them so many troubles. And when I read the book and got all the details, I'm like, this is what we need to talk about, because I think in families or in individuals, which is what you're more talking about, is we can actually put all these things in place to try and fix the problems on the surface. But unless we get to the root cause, nothing will change, and we're going to perpetuate these problems throughout the generations. And a prime example of that is conflict. So many families have this family history of conflict that just keeps repeating itself. So I suppose where I'm going with this, Lael, is the title of your book is Own Your Story. And I can see that families and individuals have stories. And I think those stories play out for the better or for worse. It can depend. And so I suppose I want to ask you first, what inspired you to write that book? And then what do you mean by own your story?
Great question. And I absolutely can understand how relevant this is in the work that you do, because so much of, I think, who we are as humans is always about protection and belonging. We're always trying to keep ourselves safe. We're always trying to make sure that we belong. And so sometimes what we do is we behave in ways that our family has done for many, many years, even though if it doesn't feel good, but we do it often unconsciously so that we belong to the family. And we can get more into that in a minute. So what you're talking about, particularly with succession stuff and all those kind of things, I completely understand, completely get, where you're coming from and why this is a really relevant topic to talk about. I guess I started working with this because particularly when I was working just with parents, a lot of parents would come to me and be like, how do I get my kid to get in the bath? Or, how do I get my teenagers to do their homework? And it was often all about how do I, connect with them or make my life easier? And how do I do it so I don't lose my cool all the time? A lot of parents come because they're like, I don't want to yell and I don't like who I'm becoming. And so I started off giving...
Like myself, I sound like my parents.
Yeah. Well, that's such a thing, isn't it? Never going to be like my mom. And then the next minute, her words are just coming out your mouth and you're like, I think what I began to see is that we can give everybody the tools, but actually it's about how we turn up in that moment. And particularly in the context of children are always responding to their environment. So whether it feels safe to be themselves, whether they feel this incredible pressure to be good or perfect or do everything right, like whatever it is, what we can often see is there's this expectation sometimes in families that we often don't even realize are there, that are quite unconscious. But also what we begin to see is that unless we look at the patterns and the stories that we carry and bring forward, we often just keep repeating the same patterns. So the way that I look at it is when I was doing these parenting courses, I was giving people tools, but we actually had to go deeper. And part of the question I would ask all these parents I worked with is, what was your imprint around this, or what was modeled to you? And what I meant by that is in your family of origin, how did your family deal when someone got upset? What was anger like in your family of origin? What was the unconscious message you got around success? What did that look like? What was your imprint around self-care and taking, having a break? And I know in many farming families, that is non-existent, right? I've worked with quite a few families who've come from family farming and they're like, no, you just keep working and you just keep working. You don't actually stop. There is no stop unless you get sick, and then that's not an ideal thing. So, I began to kind of just really unfold and see that there are so so many imprints and stories that affect the way that we turn up in the world. And unless we actually go back to that root cause and unpack why it is that way, and do we still want to carry that forward, we will often just repeat those same patterns unconsciously. And so that's why I kept coming back to what we want to do is own our story, which means having a look or being curious about where we have come from, not making our parents or our grandparents wrong. They are doing the best they could with what they had at the time. But are the stories and the imprints that have been passed on to us, are they going to serve us moving forward? Now, some of them will beautifully. We can look at things like work ethic, for example, right? And if you grew up in a family where, it was modeled working hard, being passionate about something, that could be a beautiful imprint that you can take on board that feels good. That could also be one that can be detrimental. There's a fine edge on that one there. But another great example is perhaps you grew up with a family who really believed in giving to people, who really believed in helping others in need. And what was modeled to you when you grew up was generosity and perhaps, helping others and donating time or goods. And that's an imprint that you took on board, that it's really wonderful to help people. And that's maybe something that you've carried forward. Maybe your family of origin had a beautiful love of food. And what happens is when they come together, there's a beautiful feast, and food is a time of celebration, and it's a beautiful time for family together. And that could become an imprint that it's a beautiful thing to eat together, to spend time connecting. So, we have imprints on everything from money to relationships to intimacy to feelings to, self-care, boundaries, like everything. And some imprints are beautiful and great, and they really work for us. And some actually keep us stuck, and some actually keep us, in a bit of a loop of disconnection and even trauma, perhaps. So I guess the invitation with Own Your Story is about curiosity, is to be looking at, in my life, where are those pain points, or where do I keep bumping my head up against the conflict, or where do I keep finding these same issues turn up, and leaning into that with curiosity to go, all right, let's take a look at this theme that surfaces here. And let's be curious about what was modeled to me in my family of origin about this theme. Where do I know this story from? What did I watch my parents or grandparents do? And do I want to keep carrying that forward, particularly onto my children? Do I want to start actually looking at, is there a different way that we can do this, and what would feel good for me moving forward? And I have to say that so much of what came about with this book is because I had to do that work on myself. I kept bumping up against the same issues, particularly in parenting, particularly in business. And I really had to take stock and go, okay, what was modeled to me? What's my blueprint here around it? And I use the example of finance just for a minute, which I think you'll probably relate to, is when I was much younger, my husband and I, we had 3 little kids, and, there's often a lot of struggle when, you've got little people and maybe you're a one-income family. And our pain point was often around money. And so what would happen is money would come in, but then it would just go out really quickly. And, there was kind of just enough, but it was always a massive stress. And I remember just thinking, I did not want this for the rest of my life to be this relationship with money. And so I started to do this work, and I looked at, well, what were my imprints around money? And so when I looked at both my parents, my dad had an imprint, and he used to even say these words, people with money are arrogant. And so the messaging I got was, you can't have money because you don't want to be like that. And then my mum's imprint was, you must work so hard just to have enough. That's what I watched with her. So here am I as a young girl taking on this story, this imprint that firstly, money is dangerous, like you don't want it. And secondly, if you do, you have to work really, really hard to get it. And that was exactly what was playing out in my life. And I realized I had to change my relationship to money. I realized I had to actually to rewrite that imprint to be something that I wanted it to be, which was that money can be a wonderful thing. Money, it doesn't have to be bad. And, money can come to you easily. It's a tool. It's a tool. It's an energy that we can use. So I had to actually start looking at the reframe of my relationship to it, because I'm a big believer of, if I think that something's dangerous, well, then I'm not going to put myself out there to do it, take risks. I'm going to just constantly think I have to work hard just to get enough. And, I am a big believer that our mindset and how we feel about things is often what we end up looking for in life to just, as more evidence of that's the way it is. So money was a big thing I had to shift, because I was like, I don't want that. And I don't want that for my children as well. So I really started to do some work on changing that. And then I started looking at, again, relationships I had with boundaries, with self-care, with all the things. My parents are beautiful. Like, I love them deeply and they're not wrong. They were just doing the best they could at their time of life. But here I am in a different stage of life going, what they used to do actually doesn't serve me now. And it's definitely not going to serve my kids moving forward. So here I am looking at the root cause of it to be able to look at what those imprints are and why I might still be hanging on to them and how we can shift and change them.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. That money one I think is a pretty common way of viewing things that a lot of people struggle with. The other one I find, Lael, that I'd love to get your thoughts around is conflict. In my family, conflict was a very bad thing. If you had conflict, it was shut down straight away. We don't have conflict. Whereas I've come to realize over the years that conflicts actually can be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Out of air problems get through. And so many people you see, especially when the breakdown of families, there's lots of conflict between parents, children, adult children, grandparents, aunties, uncles, etc. So as soon as this whole communication thing's up, I'll hear things like, we talk, but, we don't have any conflict. We're a lovely family. And then 10 years later, you find out that it's all blown up. So how do you tackle this conflict thing when it comes to stories? What's your thoughts around that? I'd love to hear that.
Well, I firstly wanted to start with let's just start with where our baseline is. So if we think back, and so for anyone listening, think back to when you were growing up, how was conflict dealt with? So if there was something that was a disagreement or somebody upset somebody else, what happened? Now, usually there's three options here. One is we just turn the other way and pretend it hasn't happened, right? So we bury it under the rug. We just like, it's fine, it's fine.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah, we don't talk about it. And and these are the family secrets that we carry of people being excluded. We're not going to talk about Uncle Jim because, he's not great. We basically pretend it's not happening. But as you would know, it comes out at some point, right? So we've been
with a chainsaw.
Yeah, yes. We've been conditioned to repress, turn away, not deal with anything. The other option is usually where we swing to the other end of the spectrum is it's all about anger and we project onto everyone else and we blow up and it's your fault and you don't do this well. And what we do is we protect ourselves by getting angry and projecting it onto everybody else, which can then also have massive issues because if it isn't resolved and it isn't spoken about, then we can carry grudges that can go for generations of stories and issues that haven't been dealt with. Or the third option, which is where when we get upset, when we get angry, what we do is we take a breath and perhaps we take some time, we walk away, we go for a walk, we speak to someone, maybe we get some support or counseling and we lean into what is here for me. Like, what is this making me feel? What is going on for me in this moment? And then we are brave and adult enough to sit down and say, hey, this feels tricky, but I really want to have a conversation to see if we can repair or find a way to move forward. I mean, that is an adult thing to do. It's often the child that hides and runs away or blows up and gets angry. And I do kind of joke about this. I say it in my book, but I say it all the time when I'm speaking. Most adults are like 5-year-old children walking around in adult bodies, right? Being reactive, making it someone else's fault, blowing up whenever something doesn't go the way they want. An embodied, emotionally aware adult is able to acknowledge when something's annoyed them or something's gone on, go, oh, okay, this is big. There's something happening for me here, and take a beat and take a moment and tune into what am I feeling? Am I feeling, taken for granted? Am I feeling not seen? Am I feeling angry because I'm carrying all the burden? Am I feeling not supported? I mean, there's many things that we can really tap into what the real pain is. And that's what we then want to lean into and have a conversation about. So I think the thing is, firstly, it's really important to look at what was modeled in my family. What do we do as a family? And usually families have ways, usually it is we push it away, we don't deal with anything, or we just blow up and get angry. It's rare that I meet people who have families that have enough emotional awareness to go, hey, we're going to have a conversation about this and let's get real. But it's a thing, and this is where I think we have to have a lot of compassion, is most of us weren't taught how to do this in a healthy way. And this has got a lot to do with, I think, the time that we are living in right now. And I think this is why the work you do, Ben, is really, really important for these families, because I think if we go back a few generations, our great grandparents, were just recovering from, in the war or trying to keep, just food on the table. Yep, the depression. Then our grandparents come along and they're trying to rebuild something after that, right? So there's no time for feelings and there's no time for dealing with stuff. It's just survival. And then our parents, or my parents who are in their 70s, come along and, what happened is all of a sudden they're like, well, let's just work a lot. So kind of that classic boomer thing where we just do 3 jobs. I mean, my mum said to me all the time, by the age of 21, I had 3 jobs and we had a deposit for a house. And just like, that is so far, such a different reality to where my kids are, who are adults
survival.
At the moment.
It's, back in those days, it was more about survival, wasn't it?
And so then when we came along, the next generation, it actually became all about education. So there was enough stability there now in the family home for it to be like, well, get an education or, improve yourself. And so that for me was my generation, which was very much about, get the education and see what's possible, open up the door. And then we have us who've had children, right? And so now where we are at this time in history, we have access to information in a way we've never had it before. We have access to support, science, tools, a whole lot of stuff where we can begin to actually go, hey, maybe the way we've done things doesn't actually serve us. And especially around things like emotional intelligence, conflict, dealing with our feelings, healing trauma, all that kind of stuff. It is now a time where we're actually turning towards it and being able to look at it and to heal it. And I often say that the parents that I'm working with at the moment are some of the most courageous parents because they're wanting to do it differently for their children, but also at the same time, they're having to heal some of their own stuff around how they were raised. And I really stand for that. There is no wrong. Our parents, if we were in their shoes, would probably do the same thing. And I think over the generations, we've had more access to information and understanding and all that kind of stuff. Nobody is wrong. We are just at a place where we're going, does this serve the greater good of where we are in this moment in time? And I think that's where it gets really sticky because we have our parents or our grandparents. And of course, when we say, hey, I want to do it this way, our natural reaction is to get defensive and go, why is the way I did it not right? And this is the way I've always done it. And I think what it takes is a lot of grace and a lot of awareness to be able to go, it's not wrong. It's just different now. And what we are looking at is a different time in history. And what we're looking at is how do we move forward where everybody can get their needs met, but how we can do it in a way that is not going to require deep sacrifice. It's not going to require, trauma. It's not, how do we do it in a way that we can all move forward? So I think when we come back to this conflict piece, the first part is, what was our stories and imprints? What's our default? Like, what do we default to when we get upset? Do we shut down? Do we push it away? And how could we take steps towards opening communication where it is respectful, where we can actually sit down and hear each other? And what that actually requires is us pausing a lot and being curious as to what is activated within us. And for me, that is the biggest work here because, as humans, we are so invested in being right. Like, I can't tell you how much we want to be right.
My wife's favorite saying is, Ben, do you want to be right or happy? And everything inside me is going, and everyone's heard me say this at least 100 times, right, I want to be right.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think as humans, we're so invested in being right because, that suits our ego. It means we have control. But actually there is a bigger, wider stance here. And, one of the messages that I'm speaking a lot about at the moment is, can we be curious instead of right? Can we be like, tell me more? And what's your thinking around that? And
help me understand.
Yeah. What would it look like moving forward? And I think, on one level, conflict, particularly when we've got, intergenerational stuff going on, I think that's a big question around how do we deal with conflict? Well, I think we have to look at firstly where we've come from, as I said, but also look at where we're wanting to go. And then also looking at acknowledgement of what has come before us. So one of the big things that I do some work with is really around systemic processes, which means honoring what's come before us. And I think, if you have worked so hard to build and create something, right, particularly if that's the first generation that built a farm or built something, and then the next generation came along and, often that first generation, what is so vital and important is to honor that they came first, that they were the ones that started it, that they were the ones that put all that blood, sweat, and tears into doing it. And often what can happen is a few generations down, they don't acknowledge that because they don't see it. And then people up here in the ones that first started, well, quite rightly, they get their back up because they're not acknowledged. And I think from a systemic point of view, we always have to acknowledge what came first. We have to acknowledge the work that has come first, the sacrifices, because when it is acknowledged across the whole family, what happens is we kind of learn where our place is, and we learn that we can build off what has come before. And there is a deep reverence and acknowledgement for it. Whereas when we don't acknowledge that, what can often happen is the generations before who aren't being seen, well, they get louder because they're like, hello, like, can't you see that, I've worked really hard to create this? And again, no one is wrong. Like, I really always say to people, we are all doing the best we can to survive, right? And we're always coming from protection, which means we're always trying to keep ourselves safe. We're always trying to not be hurt. We're always trying to not activate our trauma. Like, we're all trying to protect ourselves. Yet when we are looking at families are just like the biggest hotbox of all our repressed stories and stuff that haven't been dealt with. I mean, there's a saying, you think that you're enlightened, well, then just go home and hang out with your family for a week and then just see how often your buttons get pushed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the role of our family on some level, to help us grow, to help us deal with our stuff, to help us, get better. And I think it's complicated. It is definitely complicated. It has layers to it. And I definitely think that, one of the most important things when we're looking at working with families and generations is compassion and reverence and acknowledgement for what's come before, so that we can all look to the future to see where we want it to go.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point. And one of the words in there, which I wrote down and really resonated, was the word grace. It's one of our family values is grace. And we talk to our daughter because we use our family values to imprint in her. And we simply have grace is just, having the right attitude even when things don't go your way.
Yes.
And I think, would you like to unpack in your words how grace does tie into this? Because I keep hammering into families that just outside of grace, sorry if I digress here, Lael, but I keep hammering to them, the number one habit or the number one thing they need to learn is forgiveness. Yeah. And if we can't have enough grace to forgive someone, we're never going to go anywhere, because families are a messy thing and we say the wrong things and we get it wrong and we made mistakes and we're never perfect. So how do you sort of tie that into it, the whole forgiveness and grace side?
So I guess in my experience, what I've seen in working with families is we can be standing in a place where we feel really hurt, right? And that could be because we weren't listened to in the way we wanted. Maybe our parents responded to us in ways that didn't feel good. Perhaps we were smacked when we were kids. Perhaps we were criticized heavily. Perhaps we were judged. Perhaps a whole lot of stuff, right? And no parents are perfect. I always want to say this. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. We're all kind of doing the best that we think we should at the time, right? With the information that we have. So a lot of people I work with have a lot of pain towards their parents and whoever raised them. And often what happens is when they start to unlock a bit of this pain, they then feel angry because they're like, you never did this, and, you sent me away to this thing, and you never met me in the place that I needed. And we all of a sudden start pointing the fingers at them and like, you. Now, your parent, 9 times out of 10, is going to get defensive and go, well, that's you're ungrateful and like whatever.
Or I don't even remember that.
Yeah, totally. Or I don't remember it. Totally. So 9 times out of 10, our parents, which makes sense, are going to defend against what we did. And then what happens is we sit there and we're like, see, you don't get me and you don't understand. And all of a sudden, again, the stories come up of I don't belong, or you don't understand who I am, or you don't love me, all this kind of stuff. And where I'm getting to with that is, in every adult I have ever worked with, there is always a part of your childhood or the way you were raised that is going to feel painful, because as humans, we all have connection trauma on some level. And that's whether, you got left at school for half an hour because your parent forgot to pick you up, and all of a sudden you have a story that, you've forgotten, or maybe it's yeah, totally. Or maybe it's because, you were the oldest of 6 siblings and you felt like you had to then parent all of them and you never actually felt like you got to have a childhood. Or, just pick your scenario, right? We've all got a story and a scenario that we carry. And here's the thing that I want to say about that is that those stories and scenarios, I have deep compassion for the pain and hurt that has probably been there. Yet what we do is when we begin to unpack this, we get angry, and then we want to take that anger and we want to be heard in that anger. But taking it to our parents is not necessarily the place we need to take it, because often behind the anger and the hurt is pain. Often behind it is a sadness or an upset that we didn't get our needs met in the way we wanted. And that is ours to deal with. And that is what we take to a therapist. That is what we take to a coach. That is what we take to a friend, to actually firstly speak the rage that we might feel, but then get to the hurt pieces underneath and integrate it. Because when we can begin to integrate it within ourselves, what we will begin to do is realize that we don't need to keep going back to our parents, hoping for a different outcome every time we go there with this story that says, please see me, or please tell me you're proud of me, or please acknowledge me. And the amount of times I've watched parents I work with, uncover some of these hurts, and then they ring their parents or they send an email, and I'm like, don't do it, because you're not probably going to get what you're wanting or what you're hoping to get in that moment. Because actually the healing or the story has to come from within you. It's understanding it. It's meeting those parts of the pains that we have. It's doing some therapy around it so that we get to a point where we can look at our parents and we accept them for exactly who they are. We don't need them to change. We don't need them to be any different. We are just meeting them in where they're at. Now, that is what I call doing the work when we can do that. We often can't get to that place of that grace and that forgiveness until we've done the work ourselves. And I think the issue that I often see is we start to uncover some of the hurt or the trauma or whatever, and then we take it to the source and go, you're wrong, you need to fix it. And often we don't get what we need, and that's where the conflict turns up. And so,
compounds.
Totally. So I think the thing is, again, and this is what I believe for all humans, is that every single one of us has the opportunity to do our own healing work, to unpack our stories, to look at the parts that felt painful. All of us have got some pain or story from our childhood. We do. There's no perfect. I have yet to come across a person who was like, no, I've got nothing. And usually if they're like, my childhood was fine, I'm like, yeah. Sometimes I'm like,
Because pain is relative. Like you said, one kid could have been abandoned for a week on the side of the road. Another one, mum could have been 5 minutes late to school and they've got major trauma. It's all the story we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. It's all perception. It's always perception. But we've all got stuff because we're human, and we're all going to have experiences where we don't get our needs met or where we aren't met in the way that we want. Yet what I think we've been taught to do as a culture and society is to blame everyone else, is to go, it's your fault and you need to turn up this way so I'll be okay. Whereas actually we're going to end up powerless if that's where we think, because the real power comes from doing our own healing work, being, confident and connected enough to ourselves to have clear boundaries in our yeses and nos and take care of our needs, instead of hoping that somebody else will. And as long as we keep outsourcing it to somebody else, we're often going to end up disappointed. And that is often where those conflicts are going to come. And it's
out of our control too. Like if you're going to someone else saying, hey, treated me like this, or something in the past happened, whether it be a parent to a child or a child to a parent, you're basically saying, well, unless you do what I need, I'm going to continually feel like this. Yes. Whereas once you bring control back to yourself, well, then you can actually control the outcome.
Totally. And I think, I'm not saying that we shouldn't sometimes confront things and have words and set boundaries. I think it's really important that in each situation is unique. And sometimes, if people do need to go and speak to their parents, I often say to them, make sure you are deeply connected and almost resolute within yourself first, so that you're not going expecting an outcome. Sometimes we do need to speak our truth and say, hey, I was really hurt when that happened. And that felt really, I had a lot of shame come up for me, or I felt really abandoned in that. And I just need to speak it so we can let it go. Right. And then we aren't attached to what they say, because as long as we're attached to their outcome or what they're saying, we're still kind of hooked into the story of what it is.
Powerless.
Yeah. And look, we're talking about it just like, oh yeah, it's not easy. Like, I just really want to stress for everybody, this is big work, and it can feel very tricky and it can feel very painful, and we often need support when we're doing it. But I have found it is so powerful in what it creates as far as healing in families, but also about what we want to pass on to the next generation. I mean, so much of my work around imprints in my book is for people who are parents, because I'm like, what do you want to come next? Because your children are going to watch you. Their imprints are set by watching what you do, who you are in the world. And what do you want your child's story around generosity to be? What do you want your child's story around self-worth to be? What do you want your child's story around money or relationships or intimacy or love or feelings or whatever? Pick your thing.
Community, giving back, supporting
100%.
friends, family, relationships.
Yeah, they are watching you. Right. And that you are creating the imprints for them, which I know can feel like a massive pressure, right? We're not going to always get it right, but it is good motivation to heal your stuff and look at your story so that we don't keep passing it on to the next generations, and I think that's a thing when we think about family values, which you mentioned before. What are the values we want in our family? Well, are we actually living them? Or are we just saying we are, right? Are we actually embodying them and integrating them to actually help move forward? And again, it's, it can be messy and it's not always perfect, but I think if we can have that as a bit of a guideline, particularly towards what we want for the future, do we need to do some repair first? Do we need to look at our place in the bigger system here? Do we need to kind of be the one that's brave enough to say, hey, family, we need to have a conversation because nobody's talking about something. And I really want to sit here and hold space for all of us to kind of be heard. And then we can look at moving on. Because again, I found that when people have the opportunity to be heard, like really heard, then that's often where a lot of healing comes. They get to speak it. Maybe they cry. Maybe they just get to say what wasn't spoken. And then it creates space for movement.
It's funny, Lael. I heard someone say this a few years ago, and I for the life of me can't remember who, but they said, no man or woman will find peace in this world until they can forgive their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was really powerful because, again, as a parent myself, once you become a parent, you start to realise that, yeah, your parents were doing the best they possibly can. And I know my parents, I know they busted their guts to do the best they could. And I've done the same, but I know my daughter's going to be looking back going, I've got trauma from my dad, I'm sure 20, 30 years from now, the same. We're all going to do that. I think that's a really powerful thing that there has to be this thing where you let go of this. Otherwise, you're going to carry that baggage around forever.
Yeah. And look, forgiveness can be a tricky word for people because, a lot of bad things can happen to people, and they can have experienced a lot of trauma. And I've worked with a lot of people who are like, I will never forgive them because what they did was bad or evil. And I often say, I don't expect you to forgive them and you don't have to forgive. But what you want to do is you want to be in a place of acknowledgement of what happened and hand it back so you don't carry it anymore, because we don't want you to carry the burden, because when we
not my monkey, not my circus.
Yeah, totally. When we are still carrying that heavy burden of pain or shame or all that kind of stuff, well, we're the ones that get weighed down. And so I think being able to reach a place where we can acknowledge who or what happened and then find a way to pull back our power within that. And whether we use the word acknowledgement, whether we use the word resolution, or whether you use the word forgiveness, we find a place where we're like, that has been part of my story. And now it is going to stand behind me and resource me to move forward, but it's not going to be the thing that's going to weigh me down. And that's a big journey for a lot of people. And I really have so much compassion for the pain that can come with doing something like that. Yeah, again, that thing about everyone is always right. I also think what's tied up in that is often a story of, I can't forgive because if I forgive someone for something they've done to me, then that means they won, or they're right. And again, that's a tricky thing that our minds can tell us. And it's finding a way to integrate that so that we can move past it and let it go, because we're pretty good at carrying around our baggage, and sometimes it serves us and protects us, even though it doesn't work for us.
The question always, the way I look at it with my daughter is, whatever baggage I carry around, I'm carrying for her to pass on to her at some stage. And so for me, I look at it and go, well, do I really want to perpetuate historical story, shall we say, and then pass it on to the next generation? And I see so many families that have this clear vision of, well, we won't let it repeat itself. And that doesn't have to be major things. It could be small issues in the scheme of trauma, but they have all good intentions of doing it, but they still pass it on.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we pass it on because it's not spoken about or it's not healed in the way that it needs to be. I think that that's where we pass it on unconsciously. I guess the longer I've done this work, the more I find that when we actually speak what's not spoken, that is when things start to change. It is the secrecy.
Name the dysfunction.
Yeah. It's the secrecy and the hiding of the pain and the stories that often then keep repeating it.
It's interesting. I've had a couple of instances in family meetings that have turned really pear-shaped, where something's brought up because there's a third party in the room, and so people feel more comfortable to speak up. And it's like, as a facilitator or people sitting in, it's not your worst nightmare, but when you're very fresh in the industry and you're starting to learn, you're like, geez, and the first time it happens, it's terrifying, shall I say. And what I found, and I'd love your comments on this as we start to get towards the end here, Lael, because I can't believe how quickly the time's gone, but most of the time I find that if something does come to the surface and almost get placed on the table as an issue to discuss, and then we come in with, I'm not sure the word you used, but the maturity to be brave enough and adult enough to have the conversation about this thing that's sitting on the table, that actually relationships can actually strengthen. So out of the other side of that, people think, well, this conflict or this difficult conversation or raising the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about is going to create a downward spiral in relationships, actually strengthens them. Obviously, there's exceptions to rules, but do you usually find that once these things, it can actually strengthen your relationships with whoever's in your life, your children, your parents,
Absolutely.
whoever?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I guess from a systemic point of view as well, we often turn towards what we think is the symptom. Right. We often turn towards someone who's loud or making trouble, or we're like, that's a problem there. But often I found that they're sometimes the ones that are speaking what hasn't been spoken, because it's like, what are they saying that we're not addressing over here?
And sometimes that's in-laws, Lael. So an in-law comes into a family, a daughter-in-law, son-in-law, and they go, hang on, what's this weird stuff that's going in? And they name it, and next thing they're the, not the devil, but they're the
they're the problem, because they're saying what we've been trying to hide, or we're putting a lid on. And that's a hard role to play. I just want to acknowledge to anyone that has played that role before. It's really big, sometimes being the black sheep in the family, but their role is very important, because often they will speak what's not being spoken, and it's uncomfortable. But often when it is brought to the light, that's when we can actually heal it and shift. And that's actually where I do see relationships strengthen, because we're acknowledging what has happened. We're dealing with the pain that is sitting there, whether there needs to be forgiveness, whether there needs to be repair happening, like all those kind of things allows a movement forward where we can actually all move forward united, or move forward, with healing. So I think it is so important. In this work I've been doing for 20 plus years and listening to thousands of families, it's what we're turning away from, which is what we need to look towards. It's what we pretend's not there, we turn away from, we're just checking out, but actually that's where we need to turn and go, what is this here? And what are we not speaking? And what actually needs to be held for us to all move forward? But, again, I want to hold a big circle of compassion here. It makes sense why we don't do it, because we weren't taught to. It makes sense why we don't lean towards the feelings, because most of us have grown up in a behaviorism paradigm where the messaging has been so strong for so many years. You're lovable when you're good, and when you're bad, or I deem you bad, then we turn away from you or we punish you. So most of us have learned not to have emotional literacy or emotional intelligence. In most families I work with, when I say, when you were upset as a child, what happened? And everyone will say, well, I got smacked, I got sent to my room, I got ignored, I got yelled at. It's rare.
I'm so disappointed in you.
Yeah, totally. It's rare that we had a parent who could turn around and say, hey, you're really upset. I'm here. Like, tell me more. Have a cry. Or you're angry. It's okay to be angry. Not okay to hit the dog, but it's okay to be mad. Let me help you move your anger, right? This is rare in the adults that I work with today, that they had that, because the narrative and the messaging for many generations has been, you must be good all the time. And what that does is it sets up a story in us that says, I'm only lovable when you approve of me, which makes sense as to why we don't have these difficult conversations, because I'm going to upset someone, or we repress that so deeply inside us that then it just comes out in anger and rage when it tips over the edge. So it makes sense as to why we are where we are. Like, nobody's wrong here. We are a product of our times that has been all about, let's push this stuff down, because it's deeply uncomfortable to feel. Yet here we are at this time in history where we understand it more, we have some tools, hopefully, and we're able to shed some light on these bigger conversations that have been painful, and we can feel our feelings, because I'm a big fan of it's okay to cry, it's okay to get angry, it's okay to get upset, but what we do with it is what matters. What we've been taught to do is you have feelings, you make it someone else's problem, whereas really our job is just to feel it for 90 seconds. 90 seconds, feel the sadness, feel the anger, feel the frustration, feel the hurt, feel the disappointment, feel it, let it move through you, and then take a breath and go, okay, what else is here for me? What do I need to do? Like, it is all about owning our stuff instead of projecting it on everyone else. And, my great hope is that if we can learn to do this, learn to own our stuff, and we model that for our children, then our kids are going to be the ones that are going to come through and make a difference on this planet. Because when we own our stuff and we're not projecting, well, then we don't want to go to war with people, and we don't want to fight them, and we don't get greedy, and we are more generous and all those things, because we know we're enough. We have people that can meet us in our stuff and that we're lovable, and we don't have to be a certain way in order to be okay.
I love it. I love it. Difficult conversations to be had all round and a lot of work required. But yeah, that's some really powerful stuff there, Lael. And I think your book would be a great read for any family. Most of our listeners are families on the land, and that's what the focus is around the individual and the families with all your work. So, Lael, where can people find your book? And, to buy your book and all your stuff online, where can they find you?
You can just Google Lael Stone, and really I am the only Lael Stone on Google, thanks to my parents giving me a weird name. So you Google me and I come up. So you can buy my book in all major bookstores, online, all that kind of place. So it's kind of, you can buy it anywhere in Australia. Unfortunately, it's not available out of Australia at the moment, but anywhere in Australia, you can buy it online. And then I have courses that I do on my website, which is, I have like an 8-month mentorship, which is for someone who really wants to kind of go deeper, look at their stuff. I have like 8-week parenting courses, which is really around tools around parenting, but also we cover a lot of these imprints. And then I've got like webinars and podcasts and all that kind of stuff as well that people can have a listen to.
Yeah, well, there's about 10,000 people every month come into the podcast. So there's going to be a whole lot of people probably who this is really, really relevant for, Lael. So I've got 2 final questions before we wind up. Number one is there one final thing you'd like to leave after all the years of doing what you're doing? If there was one thing you could leave everyone, what would that message be?
I would absolutely say be kind and compassionate to yourself. It doesn't help when we beat ourselves up. And we are all fabulously imperfect humans, and we're all doing the best we can to keep ourselves safe. So we all behave in ways that sometimes we don't like. And I always remind people it is never too late to repair. I mean, I've worked with people in their 60s and 70s who would give anything for their parent to turn around and say, hey, I'm really sorry, or I'm sorry you didn't feel seen, or I just really want to acknowledge what a beautiful human you are. Like, they're people who are in their later stages of their lives that are still looking for that. It is never too late to repair, ever. And I think so much healing and possibility comes when we are brave enough to repair. And again, I just want to highlight, most of us were not modeled how to repair, how to say sorry. And it's a big thing that we carry because, we think that it's admitting fault. We think it makes us wrong, but actually repairing and acknowledging someone's pain is an act of love and kindness. Like, it's, and again, I'm not saying repair for things that aren't, your fault, but I think being able to own our part in a story is so important. But part of that is being compassionate and kind to yourself, because it doesn't help if we beat ourselves up. But we just, compassion for me, for everybody else, but also for ourselves, is one of the most important things that, we can do.
Fantastic. Love the message. And one question I always like to ask, because I have you said you love working with teenagers. I love working with what we call the next generation. So that's teenagers and into their 20s. So always trying to figure out how to pass on the wisdom of people that have been before us. And so if you could go back in a time machine, Lael, back to say when you're in your mid to early 20s, and you could sit down with young Lael, have a cup of coffee, have a smoothie, whatever you're into back in those days, and give her a little piece of advice, what would that be?
It would be, without doubt, ask for support. It would be lean in, ask for support. Support does not mean failure. Support is what we all need, and learn from those who've walked before you. I have, over my years, become such a fan of the apprenticeship, of like learning from those who've done it before us, of whether that's elders or whether that's people who are just masters at what they do. Like, listen, watch, learn. Like, I am such a big fan of show me, teach me, like, what is it that you've learned and done, and equally asking for support at the same time, whether that is in parenting, whether that is in business, whatever it is. I think there is so much beautiful untapped wisdom around, and it doesn't mean you have to do it the way that they do, but I think I have learned the most by listening, and being curious about people's stories in their lives, because that's what's really helped me learn how to shape mine.
I love it. That's probably some of the best advice I could have given young Ben, I guarantee.
Yes.
Excellent, Lael. Well, look, everyone, go on, grab the book, have a read. Raising Resilient and Caring.
Compassionate Children.
Compassionate Children. Give that a look as well, and check out Lael's stuff. I love your work, Lael. I think it's in our space, as we've obviously identified today. It is very relevant. And for me, why I do what I do is because family is the core of everything in the farming community. And if we can improve that, we're going to improve the outcome for farmers, both on an individual level and for generations. So I just want to say thank you very much for today, Lael. I know you're a busy lady, and maybe one day we could convince you to come back on again. Oh,
it's a topic I'm deeply passionate about. And as I said before, Ben, I love the space that you're holding for this, because it's important. As anything to do with family and business can be so tricky. And I think these are such beautiful, powerful conversations to have to ensure that success continues to happen, and I think we can't not have these conversations. So really just acknowledging the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks, Lael. Fantastic. Well, you have a great day.
Thanks.
Well, I really enjoyed that episode. Lael was brilliant, and when Sarah suggested I get her on, I wasn't really sure way back when she mentioned it whether it was going to be highly valuable, and I think she smashed it out of the park. What I love about Lael's work is it really resonates with what we're doing here at AgriCoach, because the secret to success is not just talking about fixing problems, it's understanding the root cause, because families don't fall apart because of droughts, banks, or the price of cattle. Those things just manage to expose the deeper cracks, the unspoken stories, the emotional habits, the stuff we've all inherited and never really questioned. And if you want to become a high performer or a high-performing family, and ones that thrives across the generations, you've got to do this deeper work. You've got to own your own story. And when one person in a family starts doing that, the whole dynamic can shift. Communication gets easier, relationships heal, and leadership becomes so much easier and clearer. So what I'd like to say to you today, if you really enjoyed that episode, I'd love it if you'd share this with someone else that it might add value to their family. Send it to someone you care about, or a mate of yours that's in a family business that might be wrestling with some of the challenges that Lael talked about today. Because the more families who start doing this deeper work, the stronger our rural communities will become. Well, that's it for today. And remember, I'm Ben Law, I'm the financial bloke, and it's more important who you are than what you've got. I'll see you next time.